Hello, today I'm going to walk you through getting started with Web HMI and Cimplicity 10. To start with, we'll create a new Cimplicity project. Give it a username and password, call it admin. And we'll call this our Getting Started project. So the first thing we're going to do is enable our Opc Ua Server, because that's how Cimplicity sends data and alarms to Web HMI 2.0. I'll enable that. I'll hit the Web HMI configuration tool to verify that we have a connection to Web HMI. In this case, I'm running Web HMI on the same machine, so it's the same node. If I was on a different machine, I would put that host name in there. Today, for demo purposes, we're going to enable the no security option for our Opc Ua Server in production, and normally it's highly recommended that you use the sign and encrypt highest security possible for your situation, so to keep your data safe and your alarms safe. So, but we'll show that in a different video or different getting started guide. This is just a simple let's get data going. So we're going to start with a no security. We're going to hit OK. And in my project, we're going to start by creating a class. The reason we're going to do that is just to emphasize how important the model is as we work with Web HMI. So we're going to start by creating a class, and we're going to create today a pump. Simple pump. And we're going to just use virtual points today, so not a device. So we're going to remove some of those requirements. And we're going to create a simple Boolean on/off variable. We're going to initialize it and say that it will start with the pump on, and we'll even enable an alarm. And I'll say we want an alarm to happen when the pump turns off. So now that we have a class with a variable in it, we'll create a matching object, pump01, say. And we will give it a resource. And now we are going to start the project. So we have a running server. Okay, so now while that's starting up, we're going to start up our Web HMI, which you should have installed and given a username and password to for administrative purposes. In my case, I called it admin as well. And one thing to note is by creating the same user in Web HMI as in Cimplicity, that allows us to do checking to make sure that you have control permissions when and if we do control. More on that later. So to start with, we're going to go up to the top right corner and we're going to go into our administration panel. In here, we're going to create a simple model to match what we have in Cimplicity. So we'll create a T pump here. And we'll add a variable on/off of type Boolean, just like in Cimplicity. We'll save that, and then we'll go create an object of that type, pump01. Okay. And while we're in here, we're going to now do a little bit of setup to make sure that we can talk, so that our Web HMI knows which Cimplicity project we want to talk to. So we'll create a server alias. We're going to call it the same name as our Cimplicity project. That can be important when doing direct references to Cimplicity SCADA points. And as I mentioned, we'll be talking Opc Ua. And for the server name, we need the Opc Ua server URL. So to get that, there's a couple of ways you can do that. One, if you go into the properties, you can go into the Opc Ua server, and it's this field here. That's not editable at the moment, now that we're running. So I'm going to use this feature in Cimplicity, this export Web HMI Details, and we'll export that CSV details project. And in here, you'll notice that we have some server details that gives you the URN that you're looking for to be able to talk to Cimplicity. So I'm going to copy that, and we're going to go back into Web HMI and use that as our server name. Now Web HMI has a reference to that particular project. While we're in here, just going to go show you what we created. When we created the pump object, now we can go reference that getting started alias, and now what we need is an actual data reference to that point in that project. So back to that same project, or that same details file, you can see here's our pump 01 on off, and I'm going to grab its Opc Ua address to populate the real-time data source so that we know where to get the value for on off in the model. So that's good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back into Cimplicity and create a matching visualization, what we call a mimic, for this model, these model values that we've created. So I'm going to create a screen, and I'm going to save it and call it pump mimic. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the variables section of this screen, and I'm going to add a special variable called $object. This $object variable is how we reference the context of the menu of the model in Web HMI, and I'll show you how to do that here in a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a visualization for my pump. So I'll grab a object library picture of a pump, and we're just going to add a simple text string to this this pump to represent that on-off value. So now here, with some text animation, the way we reference our model is we use that $object syntax. And now that's our context, so we'll show this when we're on the pump object. So our object, $object becomes pump, and then I reference my model variable here, on off. So I'm going to save my mimic, and now what I'm going to do is export that screen to a format that we can bring into and use in Web HMI. So pump mimic.zip. Okay, now if I go back into Web HMI, go to my visualizations section, I can import that mimic. Let's go back here. Let's go up So I put my project under the Cimplicity folder. Let's see, Cimplicity projects, getting started. So where it exported to, if you didn't take note, is under the project screens folder. There's a web export folder that contains all your exported, by default, all your exported mimics. So now I'm going to import that, and now I'll go to my designer, and now whenever I'm on an object of type tpump, I want to show that pump mimic. And you can see, because we used the same name in our animation as the model, that animation reference now maps to our on-off variable in the tpump type. So it automatically mapped that because we used the same name. So I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go to runtime. Next, I have to go configure the Opc Ua Connection Details from Web HMI to Cimplicity. So I'm going to go to this Server Configuration Manager, which is an icon on your desktop after you install Web HMI. And because my project is running, I can browse through Opc Ua and select that no security endpoint like I talked about. As mentioned, ideally you'll want to use a secure endpoint, and there's some other steps involved in making sure that your certificates are set up properly to have that secure communication. So for now, we're just going to use the none or no security option. We're going to trust the certificate. I want to make sure that the Web HMI Opc Ua client trusts this server. And then I need to give it my credentials for connecting. So as we initially entered when creating the project, these are my Cimplicity server credentials. So I use admin, and case sensitivity is crucial here. Use my Cimplicity credentials, and if I hit test, you can see I actually mistyped something. So I'm going to type that again. There you go. So you can see in the log window that initially it had a bad token, bad identity. So I mistyped the password. Now that I put the password in correctly, we securely connected. We say we won't save the log, but we'll definitely save this configuration and exit, and it'll prompt you to restart our data acquisition services and alarm gateway services so that those settings can take effect. Now you can see, going back to runtime, we've connected and we have a value of 1. If I go to my point control panel, if I go to pump 01 and look at it in the point control panel, if I change that from 1 to 0, changes there, and you can see as we configured, an alarm was configured for that, and now we have the alarm. So there we go, we have data and alarms.